And good morning, everyone. Glad to have you with us on the program this morning as we start again our annual monthly legislative updates from the Kansas legislature. And joining us here in just a bit will be a couple of state representatives. State Representative Ken Rahjes, representing the 110th district from Agra. And we're also hopefully to be joined by State Representative Jim Minnix from Scott City. Rahjes is the chair of the House Ag and Natural Resources Committee, and Minnix is the chair of the House Water Committee as well. And that will be coming up on this morning's Ag Issues program here on 580 WIBW. By the way, as well, if you're on Facebook Live on our 580 WIBW Facebook page, we're doing this live on there as well as our 580 YouTube page as well. So before we go any further, let's get a check of the weather. And hi to everyone on Facebook. We're just doing this live, as you can see. State Representative Ken Rahjes, he, of course, a longtime buddy of mine, working in the farm broadcasting field as well. And we will get going here in just a second. For those on Facebook or on our 582 page, this has been a long-time tradition when the Kansas legislative session is in session that we have state legislators on. And so we hope we like to focus on agriculture, and there's plenty to talk about. But as always, we will get the thoughts of both State Representative Rahjes, and we're also hoping to be joined by State Representative Jim Minnix. So right now we are doing a weather forecast on 580 WIBW, and we will get going with our program coming up here in just a bit. So just bear with us here, and we will get going here in just a second as we're hearing the weather, which actually is a good forecast for some folks out in the western part of the state with some snow falling. I know I-70 has been closed down more because of hotels being closed. With the roads being closed, the hotels fill up very, very quickly as well, even into parts of Kansas along the typical I-70, which is the usual thing that happens with winter storms. So stand by and we'll get going here in just a bit. All right, thank you very much, meteorologist Dan Holliday, with an update on the forecast. Actually, some snow being reported in Topeka, in the capital city, 34 degrees, both at Blewett Airport and at Ford's Field. I would assume, not having a chance to look out the window, might bring more flurries than anything else. On this morning's Ag Issues program, it is a pleasure, as always, as we start up our monthly legislative update, to be joined by State Representative Ken Rahjes. He is representing the 110th district from Agra. He, of course, is a farm communicator as well. And I can throw in there a former employee of 580 WIBW, but he is in Topeka. He's just working in the Kansas legislature. Hey, Ken, good morning. How are you?
Well, good morning, Greg. It's kind of like things have gone full circle. Over 20 years ago, I believe this got started as a way to kind of put agriculture and the legislative process together, and so it's evolved to come back now on the other side. But doing well. This weather we've had has caused a bit of a sinus situation, so hopefully I don't sound too bad. I know Representative Minnix hopefully will be joining us. He was working on trying to get everything hooked up this morning, but always a great opportunity to be here and to share the story of what's going on in the legislature and how it could affect agriculture and rural folks.
Speaking of that, we are also joined here by State Representative Jim Minnix, who is representing the 118th district from out in Scott City. Representative Minnix, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a bright and dark morning here in Topeka. I did talk to my son yesterday out in Scott City, and at that point yesterday, mid-morning, we'd had 30/100ths of an inch of rainfall, and there was snow on the way for the afternoon. That's the most moisture we've probably seen in about 4 months, so it's very welcome. But thank you for the invitation to be on the program this morning.
Well, Jim, just for your notes, it's three Western Kansas boys here talking because I grew up in Southwest Kansas, so it's always a lot of fun to be able to do this. And Ken, I'm going to start with you. And like any start to a legislative session, it is a slow start, and you couple that with the fact that there has been a delay in Governor Kelly giving her State of the State address. Actually, it's going to be next week, next Tuesday. So it's kind of the typical slow start to this year's legislative session.
Well, we're starting a 2-year biennium, and so you have some new legislators in the House, and so there's some get to know you, kind of learn procedures, and obviously before much gets started, you get the governor's budget. Typically that's released right after the State of the State. Unfortunately, because of the situation that was been postponed, we did receive the budget, but so we have that now, and so staff folks are putting the numbers all together for us to go through. One of the committees I do serve on is appropriations, and so we'll be going through all those as well once they're done by the budget subcommittees. And so you have folks now filing bills and going through that process. So it's hard to believe we're already almost at the end of the second week, and it just seems like now we're kind of getting ramped up, but there are a lot of things to do, and like Representative Minnix committee has a heavy lift, and maybe he doesn't have as many days as some of us do to get our committee work done.
And Representative Minnix, you of course chair House Water as well, and everything we have read, everything that's been discussed, the meetings that have taken place, that water is going to be, it looks like a pretty significant or take a significant upturn in discussion here through this legislative session.
I think there's a lot more impetus to have the discussion on water. One of our absolute precious resources here in the state of Kansas. The media's noticed the things that have happened in California and the Colorado River Valley. Kansas is in far better situation than those, but it's time for us to work on some of the varying situations across the state of Kansas. We have reservoirs in the east with sedimentation. We have a reduced aquifer in the west, and it seems like over this last year, a drought over at least 3/4 of the state that's been very extreme has exacerbated some of the problems and brought those to light. I'm trying to work with a new committee. 8 of the 17 members are brand new to the topic this year, 6 totally new to the legislature, and we've had a couple of meeting 2 days per week. We've had some extremely filled presentations. We go for an hour and a half with tons of information and data to try to bring the committee up to speed so everyone has a good grasp of the issues and what we have an idea of what we can do to move forward. Lots of media coverage. It's going to be a even more hot topic as the next month goes by, when we hear some of the reports of the water table drops in western Kansas and the effects that the drought is having here in eastern Kansas in some areas, the loss of water in ponds and for stock water and everything else. So it's a very broad issue that we're all going to work very hard on.
And Ken, that really ties both what you and Jim are doing, you as chair of the House Ag and Natural Resources Committee, and of course Jim as chair of the House Water as well, because that they very much are tied at the hip, so to speak.
Oh, I think so. I think, and I've constantly talked with Chairman Minnix. I said I don't want to overstep my bounds, but I think we work very much in partnership, and Representative Minnix also serves on my agriculture committee, and so we've talked leading up to this. We've talked with other chairmen to make sure there's a concerted effort in this whole situation, and you know. We're like the Kansas Water Authority not only has come to his committee, it's going to come to our committee, and since we have a very broad representation on the agriculture committee, I think it's good that my committee also has a good idea of all those situations. So they not only have that knowledge, but quite honestly, I mean, we need to make sure that the right message is getting out to all stakeholders on the situation with irrigators. I think over the years and in previous legislatures, when we had the water committee, I was the vice chair, and that was a constant battle to get that story out that, those that use water for irrigation do conservation measures and do some of these things. And I think through some of the federal things and others that we can piece all this together. And so I want what I want to do is just support Representative Minnix and to make sure that we do pass good policy or legislation, whatever we need to do. But bottom line, Greg, is we need to make sure that any of these decisions are done locally. Those that live it are the ones that should make those decisions. We don't need as I've been quoted now, I think, we don't need Eastern Kansas telling Western Kansas when to irrigate and Western Kansas to tell Eastern Kansas when they can water their yard. I think we can work and find solutions that we can find a win-win for everyone. I truly do.
Jim, before we go to break, one thing for you on that, as Ken mentioned, that it all makes it sound like what we see in the U.S. Congress, rural versus urban, and water can be used as a prime example of that.
It could be, but I don't view it that way. I think it's a resource that we all share here in the state of Kansas, whether we're rural, urban, or which political party we belong to. I do believe we all have the right to water, but we also have the responsibility to use it wisely. And I believe we currently have lots of tools that we can utilize in the Western Kansas irrigation Ogallala Aquifer. We have LEMAs, WCAs, multi-year flex accounts, water probes. There's lots of things that can be utilized along with management to probably at this time achieve at least a 20% reduction easily. And I'd also challenge people in other industries. In the livestock industry, they're utilizing 10 to 12 gallons per head per day. In the municipalities, the city of Hayes is doing an awesome job at 97 gallons per person per day. I'd challenge some of our urban areas that are nearly double that amount on water usage. How can we reuse water? How can we preserve it for future generations, extend the life, and still achieve the economic activity that we have and the products that we produce to feed the world?
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk more with State Representatives Ken Rahjes and Jim Minnix on this edition of the Ag Issues program here on 580 WIBW. All right. For those on Facebook Live, we're in the middle of a commercial break here on 580 WIBW. Hey, Steve back at the studio. Can you turn down the program audio and just use the StreamYard audio? I have a slight delay in my ear because you see I have two headphones in. This headphone, I'm hearing one audio. This headphone, I'm hearing a delay in my audio. So, except Now I'm not hearing any commercials, Steve. Sorry. If that's not possible, Steve, that's okay. So for those on Facebook Live, you're seeing kind of the behind the scenes of some of the scintillating conversation that we have, as Ken can attest to, experiencing that before. All right. Stand by, folks. We will be coming back to our second half of our Ag Issues program here in just a second.
Hope that cold gets better, Ken.
I hope so. I feel fine. Just
And we're back on the Ag Issues program this morning here on 580 WIBW. It's our monthly Kansas legislator update, and we're doing that for this session with State Representatives Ken Rahjes, he of course representing the 110th district in Agra, and State Representative Jim Minnix representing the 118th district. He is from Scott City. Ken, I'm going to go back to you, looking at the House Ag Committee and Natural Resources Committee. I know one of the things that you're working on, or soon will be working on, is a resolution concerning the lesser prairie chicken registered as an endangered species. That word, of course, coming just recently from EPA.
Yeah, Greg, been working with the Senate Ag Committee Chair Dan Kirshen from the Wichita area, Garden Plain, and something we talked about before the session of what we can do to show our support. What the Kansas delegation, congressional delegation, has said, and kind of push back and say, Kansans know best what will work for Kansas, and the impact that it has on not only the oil and gas industry, which is hugely important to our economy, but also for those that graze on some of these lands that that are kind of being targeted by Fish and Wildlife. And so what we're working on is a joint resolution, and to send it on and to say that we as the Kansas legislature, um, you know, basically, support what the majority of the Kansas delegation has said, is that maybe take a pause, take a second look before you put the lesser prairie chicken on the endangered list, and the impact that it could have economically and so on, knowing, as in the past, that once this weather cycle breaks, we do get moisture again in a significant level, if you will, in these affected areas, the prairie chicken population will gain. And so we also know, though, in the scheme of things, places like New Mexico and other places have a much larger impact, even in Kansas. But still, it's one of those things that we believe that that we should send a strong message also from the elected officials that are elected locally to represent folks on the state level, that we do not support what the federal government's trying to do.
And Jim, looking at that, what it could do, boy, the if you're a rancher out there or have any oil and gas interest, that potentially for an endangered registration for the lesser prairie chicken, the effect it could have on those ranchers and those with oil and gas interest.
Exactly. I personally had 67 acres of CRP that was beginning its, I believe, third 15-year contract here several years ago when they first started talking about the lesser prairie chickens. Before we got a year within that contract, I went in and returned my payments, paid my penalty, and took it out of the CRP. I really did not like the restrictions that were coming, and I see many of the same things proposed today. I did not break that ground and make it farmland. It's part of my pasture. Cowherd really likes to spend a little time on that ex-CRP ground that was interseeded with legumes many years ago. But a lot of oil and gas production in the area near my farmstead. And every time that the federal government tries to come in and tell us that we need to protect these birds, it affects their operations tremendously. The pheasant population was very small this year, mainly due to the drought. I firmly believe that when we get more moisture and we can grow more crops, that's more cover and habitat for the birds, and those numbers will come back easily in southwest Kansas.
Ken, as we mentioned earlier, the State of the State address has been moved back to this coming Tuesday. But have you guys received the budget from the governor?
We have. I guess I would say I believe we have. I've seen piecemeal of it, or it's available anyway now for us to look at more than just maybe the 3,000-foot view to really dig in. I'm a little disappointed from what I've seen so far is that, the governor talked about how important water is, as we all have. I mean, many of us have been talking since the end of last session that water would be the issue of the session. I still believe that to be the case because it does affect everyone, like Representative Minnix has said. So, but that the governor didn't maybe put more specifics. I mean, I'm glad if she wants to fully fund the state water plan and pay off some bonded indebtedness, and I think that's good. And some of the fiscal policies she wants to implement is fine. But is she putting money in for conservation and for some other measures as we look at trying to tackle this? So, and then we'll find out some other things. I don't know if there's going to be new programs. I don't know where the appetite is for the legislature, even though we may have a budget surplus. I mean, a lot of that money is already spoken for, and we also understand we are lagging a bit behind in the economy, and knowing that last year we did have record or near record income on the farm, but we're all prepared for 2023 to be a completely different story, and so we can't long-term budget on, say, a peak year. You have to do it on basically an average, or as many of us like to do, continue to build up that rainy day fund. And that's one thing I'm looking forward to working with all the members and the administration on, is to make sure we continue to have a strong rainy day or a safety net fund, so we don't get into playing these games of spending almost every dime we have for all these different programs.
Because, Jim, you weren't in at that time that took place, but I'm sure you've heard many stories on that type of situation, and then obviously what we're seeing in the current situation right now.
Oh, yeah. I was a county commissioner in Scott County for 26 years. I've done lots of budgeting and audits of those budgets. As I look forward, I see some problems within the general U.S. economy. Some of the fiscal policy that we followed over the last several years is heading this country toward a recession. I don't mean to be a doomsdayer. I think we can weather some things here, but it's going to change the financial picture in the state of Kansas and the United States, in my opinion, quite a bit in the next 6 to 12 months. The governor's proposal does not seem to be aware of that in many ways, And I think we need to be careful in how we spend and reserve our money here in Kansas to weather some uncertain times in the very near future. So I agree with Ken. I think there's many parts of the governor's proposed budget that we can improve on in the legislature.
All right, gentlemen, sounds good. I know you had a busy day yesterday. I know you've got a busy day today as well. So I'm going to let you guys go so you can get ready for another day of session. But State Representative Jim Minnix, hey, good to have you on the program. Very much appreciate you joining us this morning.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
And State Representative Ken Rahjes, as always, pleasure to be able to speak with you. And we'll talk to you guys next month.
All right, Greg, thank you so much.
That is our Ag Issues program for today. Stay with us when we come back. We'll get a check of the news headlines and we'll get a check of the weather forecast. That comes up next.